Okay, my name is Professor Sekou Franklin. I want to thank the Honors College for inviting me. I want to acknowledge Dr. John Bile, the Dean of the Honors College. He's also my department chair and offered a great amount of support for many of the young faculty who were there at the time, Dr. Mary Evans, as well as the Honors College. And I'm going to talk about legislative redistricting. The title is called The Contours of Democracy, Race Representation and the Politics of Legislative Redistricting. Ironically, I haven't authored much on this topic in the academic literature, but a lot of this, what I'm going to talk about, is drawn from working on the last two rounds of redistricting, primarily with civil rights groups like the Southern Coalition for Social Justice and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and also working on voting rights cases related to redistricting. So I hope to give you at least a closer view of what it's like to work on redistricting, and then we'll look at also Tennessee as well, and redistricting. We'll look at the litigation in Tennessee, which unfortunately we lost. We found out a couple weeks ago. That case is settled or finalized as of September 20th. So I'll discuss who I am, give you an overview of redistricting. Some of you may or may not know how redistricting works. I'm going to give you hopefully a detailed but not overly detailed way in which redistricting works. I'll look at it from the standpoint of the civil rights community. We'll look at race and redistricting as well, gerrymandering. And I'll make a provocative argument that legislative redistricting results in rigged elections. Not as provocative as you may think. And this outcome has been affirmed by the federal courts, even though there are constitutional checks and balances that are in place. And then as far as race and racial gerrymandering and race, that's also central to redistricting. And it also creates a rigged process. And overall, what we've seen in the redistricting process across the country is the loss of competitive seats, competitive districts, and also minority vote dilution. And that loss, and this process, although we're in a hyper-partisan environment, at least been in a hyper-partisan environment for the last 2 decades, this process and the rigged game happens on both sides of the political aisle historically. So just take a little bit something about myself. I was the president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists from 2019 to 2021, and we had a participatory redistricting project in place with students and faculty across many universities. We were partnered with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and we trained a lot of students in this process. So in addition to that earlier work that I told you about, as president of the organization of the Black Political Scientists, we had a really important initiative where we trained individuals to do what's called community-based redistricting. In a nutshell, what happens with redistricting is that community groups play an instrumental role in not only monitoring the process, asking for transparency, but historically producing plans that can be presented through legislative bodies. Prior to 2013, you had a historic case called Shelby County v. Holder that essentially was a voting rights case that undercut a major item, a major section of the Voting Rights Act called pre-clearance. Prior to that case, if you lived in a state that was covered by that section, southern states in particular, southwest states in particular, were required to hear community plans from various community members. So a lot of these individuals involved have histories related to that process. And then for Tennessee, I served as a redistricting coordinator for the NAACP. We partnered with the League of Women Voters, which you might have heard about, Dr. Evans, that's maybe how you got my name up. And we partnered with Civic Tennessee and organized 3 redistricting training hearings across the state. We had a number of informal trainings, trainings with students. We also had 3 students from MTSU who worked on this project with us. They were paid too through a grant, one of whom was I believe a Honors College student, Trinity Henderson. And then we also partnered with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project and MGG Redistricting Lab out of Tufts University. And I'll talk a little bit about that work and what it produced in a few minutes. And we assisted in redistricting efforts in Jackson, Clarksville, Covington, Tennessee, which is far west in Fayette County. So we'll talk about some of that work as we move forward in this process. So just to give you a rough shot analysis of what is redistricting, if this is your first time hearing it, redistricting is a drawing of legislative districts based upon population shifts and changes. And those population shifts and changes are measured by the U.S. Census, the decennial census, which occurs every 10 years. Once the census is conducted, there's been any shifts and changes in legislative districts or in states or in counties, depending upon what unit of government you're talking about, then those districts will be drawn to accommodate those shifts and changes. If there's no changes been made, then those districts will be left alone. This is a process that's mandated based upon a constitutional provision, initially coming out of Tennessee called Baker v. Carr, and affirmed this in a series of other court cases since the 1960s. So now, every 10 years, you have a redistricting process that takes place. Almost every single unit of government across the country, Congress, legislatures, city councils, school boards, road boards, go through the redistricting process if they're what's called contiguous or connected districts. That sounds like a mouthful, but it's an important process that determines representation here in Rutherford County we'll talk about, but also across the nation. We'll get back to this in a few minutes. Historically, when we do redistricting, to tell you how it works from all advocates, whether you're, regardless of what political affiliation you belong to, the idea is that you want to meet certain criteria. And the mandatory criteria you have to meet is districts have to be contiguous. So if you have, in Tennessee, you have 9 congressional districts. Contiguous means they have to be connected together. So if you look at Tennessee's congressional map, you see all 9 districts, the boundaries are all connected together from far east to far west. And then you see other principles that if you are doing redistricting the right way, you want to meet, whether it be the district should be compact. We focus on the preservation of communities of interest. Some of you may be in communities where you share the same sheriff department, you share the same police department, you share the same river, you share the same transportation department. That means you have what's called a communities of interest. You don't want those communities split up. You don't want to be on this side in one neighborhood and then the next street over in another neighborhood, you're in another district because you may share the same infrastructure and the same resources. So you want to keep communities as a whole, and there's some other principles as well. Tennessee doesn't abide by some of these principles, but they're essentially recommended by the National Conference of State Legislatures and civil rights groups. And then in redistricting, at least since the 1990s, race cannot be, quote unquote, a predominant factor. That means that if you're drawing districts, whether it be districts that are favorable to whites or districts that are favorable to blacks, that cannot be the overwhelmingly motivating factor as to why you draw that district. Race can be a factor, but it can't be the predominant or motivating factor. But it can be a factor. So when you're going through training with students and with community members, we're training people how to draw districts that meet these various criteria. And then when we draw districts, we're not just looking at populations based on the census, but the key indicator is the voting age population. Because you may live in a district in which you may have 700,000 people in a congressional district, and the voting age population might be 400,000, whereas another district might be the exact same 700,000 persons, but the voting age population is 300,000. And if you're drawing districts in Congress, a congressional district map, or a state legislative district map, the population of each district has to be roughly the same. For Congress, it's the most particular type of district. So I believe the populations have to be the same minus literally 1 person or 1%. If you are drawing state house districts in the Tennessee legislature, you can deviate from that amount. If the amount is 69,000 persons per district, you can deviate up or down by 10% or 15%, depending upon what state you're talking about. And obviously, when it comes to redistricting, the poor communities are oftentimes underrepresented. Why? Because they are the ones who are the least accounted when it comes to the census. If you are canvassing in a community to collect the census, it could be a rural community, a poor community, it could be a community that's affected by, right now, if this is a community, if the census was taking place right now in Tennessee, and they had to collect census data in Appalachia, in eastern Tennessee, or western North Carolina, there's a possibility that population will be undercounted. And so that means that they're undercounted, they're going to receive less representation. And then just the redistricting universe involves a lot of different interests. This is the role that we play in political science. Social scientists, both qualitative social scientists and quantitative social scientists, are asked to assist in helping drawing maps and also asked to assist with litigation. So the good redistricting plans you see emerging from communities bring in community members, lawmakers, social sciences, and voting rights litigators as well. And with the redistricting process, because redistricting determines who's going to sit in office, big money interests are involved in this. Big money interests are involved in this. So as you can see right now, right here, when it comes to redistricting, you can see because the population system changes, this is how the new set of congressional district maps occurred after the 2020 census. So if you think about redistricting, think about this, the steps. Census takes place in 2010. Census takes place in 2020. It was delayed for years because of COVID, so it took place in 2021. State legislatures in most areas are asked to draw the maps. Maps are drawn based upon those population system changes. Some states have lost populations, lost congressional seats. Some states that gained populations, gained congressional seats. You can see right here, Florida, Texas, and North Carolina, the Sun Belt region is gaining in stature. They're gaining more congressional seats because you find more people moving there. And then the industrial Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, where the old steel, old manufacturing, old industries are dying. People are leaving those areas and they're losing populations, and thus they're losing congressional seats. So what we're seeing with redistricting and what we're seeing with Congress in particular is we're seeing a reinvention of where people are moving. We're seeing congressional districts being remapped, and ultimately this is also going to affect the Electoral College since the number of members in the House determines that number often. And we're seeing also Tennessee playing front and center. I'll talk about this later on, where Tennessee is probably going to gain another congressional seat in the next round of redistricting in 2030 because we've seen a huge population surge, especially in Rutherford County. Rutherford County is 27%. It's technically the third fastest growing county in Tennessee, but really it's number 2 because the second one is Trousdale, which has a prison. So that's the reason why they're going. So really, if you take away Trousdale County, Williamson County, Rutherford County are fast growing. And this means that Middle Tennessee, you in this room, if you're going to stay in Middle Tennessee, students in this room 5 years from now will play a critical role in the redistricting process because the power base in Tennessee is going to be in Middle Tennessee. It's not just going to be in Nashville as a hub city, but it's particularly going to be in the surrounding edge cities of Nashville. And then, so when it comes to redistricting, redistricting impacts all these various units of government. So we do redistricting for Congress, we do it for state legislatures. You can see right here, it may be hard to read, but I think I'm going to do this right. Well, you can see right here, there's been a 62,000 person increase per congressional district in Tennessee. We see the Tennessee State Senate, we have 33 districts. There's been a 290,000. There's been a 70,000 person increase in the state senate districts, and in the Tennessee House, there's been a 5,000 person increase. So we're seeing a huge population surge. And what that meant for Rutherford County, those of you in this room, is that if you sat in this room in 2014, Rutherford County had four legislatures in the House of Representatives. Now we have 5. Why? Because of the census and the population surge, we have an additional member that was added to the Tennessee House of Representatives. And then it also occurs to local government units. So I want to emphasize this point. In Tennessee, we have 906 units of government, including special purpose districts, school districts, utility districts. If you voted in the last election, you might have voted for the road board. You may not have known that. And so we have 906 units of government that that are districts that redistricting could apply to. And then when it comes to redistricting, you say, why, who cares? Why does representation matter? Well, it matters in the sense of because you want people who represent your interests, of course. But it also matters in terms of federal dollars. Federal dollars are determined based upon populations. 1.6 trillion federal dollars are determined based upon the population, the size of that congressional district or that county. And you can see right here, this impacts funding for example, Community Development Block Grant funds right here. This impacts funding for Section 8 housing, former rural grants. And in Tennessee, you may think, well, I'm from a small county, a rural county, this doesn't matter. But think about this. In September 2020, Governor Bill Lee announced that the Community Development Block Grants for the small cities and rural communities amounted to $25 million. But in order to get that money, they measured it based on income, population, age of housing, etc. But you needed a letter of support from the representatives in the state and the Senate and the House who came from that particular county. So when we talk about redistricting, we're talking about representation, we're talking about how much money will flow into your particular community and into your particular district in your particular county. So all this matters, all is connected, and all it matters. And so now here's the catch: legislative districts can be rigged, 100%. Right now, I can tell you for 100% fact, there are map makers right now who can determine the likelihood that one group will vote for one candidate versus the other based upon the block that they live on, based upon mapping software and other statistical techniques. So districts are often drawn to favor one party over the other. Some call it the rigged election. Districts are gerrymandered. Many districts are gerrymandered across the country. And both parties do it. We do it here in Tennessee. That means the districts are drawn in an irregular fashion, in a distorted fashion, often designed to produce the outcome that they want, to produce an outcome that's predictable. In most states, legislatures draw districts for district boundaries, and not just for the state houses, but for Congress. In Tennessee, for example, our state legislature draws the district boundaries for 9 members of Congress, the 33 senators, and also the 99 House members. A few states have redistricting commissions that are supposed to be independent, but there's some more analysis to determine whether or not that actually happens. And then local district boundaries for Rutherford County, for Nashville, for Wilson and Williamson County are often drawn by planners at the planning commissions with assistance from state government officials. Race matters with redistricting. Why? Because oftentimes legislative districts were historically drawn to marginalize black voters. If you think about the Tuskegee Civil Rights Movement, and Tuskegee Civil Rights leaders called for a boycott in 1957. Why? Because you had a city, one of the few cities in Alabama, where African Americans were voting in the 1950s, and the state government, the state legislature, actually drew a district boundary for the city council that drew out all the black community. So if you stepped into Tuskegee in 1957, you saw where African Americans lived, they had no representation. That was intended to undermine the black vote. They brought in Martin Luther King Jr. in 1957. They called for a boycott. The Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, newly created in 1957, came in and litigated the case, and one of the few cases that essentially was won at that time, Tuskegee was forced to make a change. The Supreme Court says that race cannot be a predominant or motivating factor, the principal reason as to why you draw a district. However, and that is known as racial gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering can be done to advance so-called black, Latino, and Asian representation, or it can be used to disadvantage that representation. Supreme Court has said essentially you can't do that in a case called Shaw v. Reno and subsequent cases as a result of that. However, the Supreme Court does allow for political or partisan gerrymandering. So you can have states can draw district boundaries that favor one party versus the other party. And oftentimes partisan gerrymandering or political gerrymandering is a mask or a cover or a window to have the same impact as racial gerrymandering. So what you find going on around the country is that states are engaging in what we would consider to be racial gerrymandering, but they're doing it under the disguise of partisan or political gerrymandering. It's just hard to find a smoking gun to make that determination, but if you talk to advocates on the ground, state lawmakers, if you talk to staff members in the State House, you'll find that it's being done all the time. So the courts are allowing for political gerrymandering that has an adverse effect on minority representation as long as it's done under the guise of, or the disguise of political gerrymandering. We also have a bunch of civil rights laws that are intended to protect minority voters at the voting booth, in particular as it pertains to redistricting. So we have a constitutional framework in place, although that framework has been undercut in recent Supreme Court cases. We have a framework in place designed to guard against racial gerrymandering that is adverse to racial minorities. But in the more recent years, that framework has been undercut and has been weakened. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So what we have ultimately is what we often refer to as the rigged election. That means that lawmakers in the State House can draw districts that favor one party versus the other. Whichever party is in control of California, which I think they have an independent commission, whichever party is in control of New York, or whichever party is in control of Tennessee, is going to essentially draw districts in favor of that party. And so they're going to produce an outcome that's intended and that's predictable. And some people argue that this has an impact on competitiveness, has an impact on enthusiasm. You can see right here that up top you can see that these are the 9 congressional districts. Only about 5% are competitive. These are the 99 House seats right here, which essentially operate through a gerrymandering process, and only 6% are competitive. If I were to put a map of the state Senate seats, you would find a similar competitive problem. So what you have around the country are you have these districts that are drawn that are often rigged in favor of one party versus the other, and ultimately what that does is that reduces enthusiasm in midterm elections, that reduces enthusiasm in state house races, and that reduces competitiveness. Now we're here in Murfreesboro. Where does Murfreesboro stand for this? Well, Murfreesboro is one of the few cities, maybe the only city of this size in Tennessee, that does not have what's called single member districts. we elect members through an at-large system. That means that no lawmaker, no candidate running for city council ever has to step foot here in Murfreesboro, here at MTSU, or even adjacent MTSU to get voters. They can mobilize voters across town and spend their entire time and their money across town just to essentially win elections through what's called an at-large district process. I'm very adamant that we should change that. It was proposed to the mayor at a city council meeting by the NACP president at the time, Goldie Wade, and they pretty much just put it under the rug. We also are in Murfreesboro, and which matters in a sense because students matter. And I'm not sure if this clicker is working right here, but you can see right here, there's a star right here. This was the redistricting plan for the State House that operated from 2012 to 2022. And this star right here represents, I believe, MTSU and the adjacent areas. If you were to really hone in on this, you find that the 4 legislative districts almost divide the MTSU corridor into 4 parts, right? And we believe, we don't have necessarily a smoking gun, we don't have a paper trail proving this, but we believe that this is designed to undercut student representation. This is designed to dilute the student voice. At-large elections, in which they don't have to do anything to kill the students, and a redistricting plan that was in operation for a decade that really divided and diluted the student voice. So Murfreesboro matters in this respect too as well. We're also facing a hostile court, and this has been the most depressing part of the redistricting plan. The attorneys working on redistricting, I know quite a few of them. They're brilliant, they can develop arguments that, that historically would survive a court challenge, but the court, the federal courts, the Supreme Court in particular, this last round of redistricting was schizophrenic. It was literally, they would do what's called a shadow docket, they would literally make a decision based upon just purely partisan interest. And they would go back and forth. For Wisconsin, they made a decision. Initially, for Alabama, they made a decision, and it was called a Purcell principle, if you want to go into details. And they were just finding any reason to decide against the Civil Rights Committee. And so it's been quite particularly schizophrenic. The courts are ready to completely strike down the Voting Rights Act, what's known as Section 2. They're essentially gearing up for that. And then there's been other ways in which you can advance fair redistricting plans that assist communities of color, poor communities, and they're essentially getting ready to strike down those kinds of constitutional frameworks. If you're interested in it, these are the frameworks that those are applicable to. So we're dealing with a hostile court system, and so what a lot of community groups do is they develop what's called community-based redistricting efforts, or participatory redistricting efforts, where they're trying to get community leaders involved. This is the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights working with students and local activists in Jackson, Mississippi. And this is another example of that. In order for them to garner and essentially identify how districts should be drawn. Think about your local communities. Think about your local communities. Only community members who are active are going to be able to determine where people live. If you're from a rural community, you may know that someone may live in an area that may appear to be desolate, but there are people there. You don't want them excluded from the redistricting plan. So it's important to get community members involved through a community redistricting process. You want to make sure you have communities of interest that are taken into account as well. We talked about that earlier, that you want to make sure you keep communities that have the same interests whole. If you share the same infrastructure, transportation, sheriff, police department, water source, you want to make sure you don't split up those communities as well. In Tennessee, in the last round of redistricting several years ago, I believe 2021, one of the lawmakers proposed a process that can ensure fair redistricting. This included a public comment period for 2 weeks. This included ways in which you could disentangle partisanship from the process. This included compliance measures for federal laws and the state constitution. And the state legislature voted it down. Voted it down. And because, again, it's the way you do the redistricting process in many states is through this kind of rigged process that we talked about earlier. As mentioned earlier, for those of us working in Tennessee, through the NAACP, Civic Tennessee Legal and Voters, we organize redistricting hearings in order to get input primarily around the 9 congressional districts and the state house districts, but also that input related to local redistricting efforts as well. And these are some of the issues that we found from community groups that weighed in on those 3 hearings in Memphis, Chattanooga, and Clarksville. We found that communities wanted to keep communities as a whole. They wanted to draw districts based on community interest. Transparency was a big issue, especially at the local level. At the local level, you see some of the biggest abuses occurring and taking place. And you see redistricting plans emerging with very little public comment, very little input, and oftentimes they're fast-tracked without the community even knowing about it. In the prison-based gerrymandering and local redistricting efforts, we do have some legislation that gets to that point here in Tennessee. Posted redistricting materials in Spanish, abiding by the VRA, the Voting Rights Act as well. And then we wanted to make sure that we wanted to disclose which groups were behind the scenes when it comes to redistricting. If lawmakers are producing a redistricting plan, 100% of lawmakers are not drawing that plan, right? We want to know who is drawing that plan, who is assisting that plan. We wanted to oppose racial gerrymandering, excessive racial gerrymandering, and publish some maps for scrutiny as well. So we had these arguments and these ideas came out of these hearings that we took that occurred. But then Tennessee finally took a vote on this redistricting plan after being delayed by a year for COVID. They took that vote, I believe, in January of 2022. And this is what happened with that. We had a plan that was horrible, particularly for minority voters. The plan that was adopted surgically and intentionally targeted black voters, black communities. It was known as an opportunity or crossover district. An opportunity district is a district in which a multiracial coalition can come together and vote for what's called a candidate of their choice. The redistricting plan also engaged in what's called an excessive number of county splits in the Tennessee Constitution and subsequent to state challenges. If you have 99 House districts, typically you can't split up more than 30 counties to achieve that redistricting plan. In this case, they went way past that. And then they even carved up streets and neighborhoods as well. In one case, anybody from North Nashville and Bordeaux area, they took a lawmaker named Vincent Dixie, who lives in Bordeaux, and they literally carved the redistricting plan around his house. Literally around his house. After raising concerns about this in the legislative committee, they finally added this plan, his house back to the district. But it's literally house right here, his house around it, house right here, house right here, house right here. If you're familiar with Gloria Johnson and Sam McKenzie, they eliminated one of their districts and they put them in the same district together. So she just essentially moved to another district. So all these things took place when it came to the Tennessee redistricting process. And for Nashville, we got the worst of those of us that live there, we got the worst of the redistricting plan. Because Nashville is a city of about a metropolitan government of about 700 and I think maybe 30 or 40,000. Typically, all congressional districts in the state of Tennessee have around like 750,000 people. So Nashville is a city where you could put an entire congressional district in that city. But what they did with Nashville is they split up Nashville into 3 different parts. So in Nashville, if you live in East Nashville, you're going to be in the 6th district, and your district now will go all the way to East Tennessee. If you live in Hermitage, if you live in Hermitage, you'll be in the 7th district, and your district will go all the way to Scott County, in Appalachia. And then if you live in North Nashville or West End or by Fisk University, you're in the 5th district, and that 5th district goes all the way to West Tennessee and to the Kentucky border. So they split up Nashville into 3 different districts, and in doing that, they also reduced the number of African Americans in that district, in each district, as you can see right here, and they diluted the vote of both blacks and Latinos in the city of Nashville. So collectively, if you were to stand at the center of Nashville, if you were to do a Venn diagram, stand at the center in which all the districts connect with each other, Nashville is now connected to 32 out of the 95 counties in Tennessee in terms of district plan. That's about 1/3 of the counties in Tennessee. And you can see right here, this is a map of Nashville, the redistricting plan. This is the old redistricting plan that was operative from 2012 to 2022. Just think about that redistricting plan and put pause on that for a minute. But look at these other redistricting plans, these congressional districts as well. You have the 8th district that goes all the way to Germantown. Think about this right here. This is Marsha Blackburn's district, no disrespect to her. But her district went from Clarksville all the way to Hardeman County. That's far west, that's the Tennessee Delta. That's old cotton country. Think about the Murfreesboro right here. These are all, half of these were gerrymandered districts that operated between 2012 and 2022. This is the new redistricting plan right here. You can see right here. This plan right here is where Nashville is. You can see that Nashville, if you live in the North Nashville area, you live in the West End area, your district covers this entire area. If you live in South Nashville area, if you live by Overton High School, your district goes all the way to down here. And then if you live in the Hermitage area, if you live in the Hermitage area, your district goes all the way to Scott County. And so that's what the new redistricting plan did when it for the state legislature. And so we had problems with that, but we also had problems with other components of the redistricting plan. So as a reminder, what the state legislature did was they drew districts for Congress, they drew districts for the 33 state Senate seats, and they drew districts for the 99 House seats. And we found other problems. Number one is that they took the state legislative districts out of Shelby County. So they reduced them from 14 to 13. They impacted other districts known as opportunity districts in Shelby County. That's Memphis area. They split more than 30 counties. They eliminated an opportunity district for the state Senate in Shelby County as well. This was for the House, this was for the state Senate. And then in doing this, that diluted Black and Latino votes in Gibson, Maury, and Rutherford counties. You can see right here, this is Gibson County. I believe this is Humboldt, Tennessee. And they split this into two districts. This is a Black community that was split into two districts as well. And then we were looking at local redistricting battles. We were able to assist with the NACP. Jackson, Tennessee, we essentially were able to add back a city council seat there as well. Fayette County has one of the worst redistricting plans and some litigators looking at that right here. But we also found problems in Covington, Clarksville, Montgomery County, and also the city of Chattanooga. So we see a redistricting plan both locally but also statewide that was also problematic. And this gets to, again, the great city of Murfreesboro, along with Smyrna and also Laverne. We wanted to bring litigation on this issue, but we didn't have the legal muscle to do so. But this is what they did for Laverne. Laverne right now, you may not know this, is a majority Latino and Black city. It's about 52% Latino and 52% Black. And so they took Laverne, which is near Antioch, and they drew Laverne all the way to this part of Murfreesboro, which covers the Case Lane area. This is a gerrymandered district. I can tell you 100% for a fact, you don't have a paper trail without emails, lawmakers know the exact racial makeup of Laverne. They will never made it on television with everybody that does redistricting rules. And they see gerrymander Laverne into a district in Rutherford County. And as mentioned earlier, Rutherford County got 5 congressional seats as a consequence of the population vote as well. So Rutherford County really got harmed to the Laverne part of Rutherford County in the redistricting plan. Because remember, redistricting determines who's going to represent the voice of that particular area. And race does matter. Lawmakers do look at race along with partisanship when it comes to drawing redistricting plans. So when you see a lawmaker get up on TV and say, well, we didn't take into account anything, I can almost close my eyes, they did. They're the best map makers, I can bring right now, the best map makers right now who can determine the likelihood that this block over here will vote for one party versus the other. And then we filed a lawsuit, as I come to my main conclusion. We filed a lawsuit primarily around the Davidson County redistricting plan. We added the Senate district in Memphis, East Shelby County particularly, to that lawsuit. We were going to add the Laverne to that lawsuit. We didn't have the litigation muscle for that. We filed a lawsuit a year or so ago, and it was called a racially gerrymandered lawsuit. It was a lawsuit based upon a 14th Amendment claim. It was not a voting rights lawsuit. Maybe getting into the details and weeds of why this strategy was important. If you follow the redistricting, this lawsuit approximated the South Carolina redistricting plan lawsuit. It did not approximate the Alabama and Louisiana plans. So you can see right here, the NACP helped work on this lawsuit, particularly around the way it sliced and diced minority populations in Nashville and Davidson County, and in the end, we lost. And that's probably the best way, sobering way to say it. And what the courts did was this, and I'm going to close my commentary in the next 5 minutes, but hopefully I can explain this the right way. So if you follow redistricting, you probably follow the Louisiana and Alabama cases. Those are Voting Rights Act Section 2 cases. That gets into the weeds of this. Our case is not a Voting Rights Act case. Our case was basically a case around racial gerrymandering and a case around constitutional violations. It was supposed to be an easier case, honestly. But what happened was that in April, the Supreme Court made a decision in a case called Alexander versus South Carolina NAACP. And this case dealt with a similar dispute in which lawmakers in South Carolina, when they drew their new congressional district, they split up the city of Charleston. And splitting up the city of Charleston, then they eluded the black vote of Charleston. The Supreme Court came in that particular case and decided against the NAACP and said it was not a racial gerrymander, it was a political gerrymander. It was a partisan gerrymander. And partisan gerrymanders are constitutionally allowed. Right? We thought it was a partisan gerrymander, a political gerrymander, done that was disguising as a racial gerrymander. And so it was a devastating blow for South Carolina. I knew one of the attorneys that argued that case for the Supreme Court, for the NAACP. So because our case was parallel, the same constitutional claim, what the judges in our case did was they said, well, the Supreme Court made this argument here, so this applies to you. And so we could have challenged that case, but we decided not to, and we decided on September 20th, just a couple of weeks ago, not to bring a claim. The League of Women Voters was involved in that particular dispute as well. But this is what I really want to close off with in the last couple of minutes, if I can. It's not that we lost because it was always a long shot case, because frankly the Supreme Court and the federal courts are much more hostile to voting rights claims and other similar constitutional claims than they were, say, for example, even 20 years ago. But it's the arguments that they made, the Supreme Court made. And one argument was this idea of political gerrymander, that political gerrymander is being used as a disguise to really get at racial gerrymander. And the courts are unwilling to accept that. The other argument, which was problematic, was historically, in the constitutional claim that we brought, there's 40 years of lawsuits in which you can demonstrate intentional discrimination based upon a variety of different ways you can collect evidence. Circumstantial evidence, inference, statements, patterns, a whole range of things. And the court has moved away from that, or they moved away from that in the South Carolina case. The court is saying that you need direct evidence. You need lawmakers and their emails, lawmakers and their statements saying that we divided Nashville, or we divided Charleston up in order to dilute the black vote, in order to harm the black vote. And the lawmakers are much smarter than that, than to put it in an email or to put it in a traceable text message system. So then the question became is, how can we get information from Tennessee lawmakers demonstrating that they drew Nashville district boundaries, knowing that it would dilute the black and Latino vote? And what the Supreme Court has allowed and what the federal courts are allowing is what's known as legislative immunity. That means that lawmakers do not have to turn over any evidence of how they deliberated on the plans in order to litigate those cases. Right? So to go back to that Tennessee legislative measure that was proposed by Senator Jeff Yarborough, the idea that we need to know who's involved in these plans behind the scenes, and lawmakers struck that down. We have no knowledge right now who drew the redistricting plans for Tennessee. Right? Unless you are the Ethics Council for the state legislature, Doug Hines, right? Unless you are lawmakers themselves who are in the room, there's no one in Tennessee who knows who drew those redistricting plans. You have a better chance finding a corporate leader who made a decision about an oil spill than you have finding out who drew redistricting plans in Tennessee. And the federal courts have unfortunately allowed that by giving these lawmakers legislative immunity. So we decided not to move forward with the plan. It's very costly. These cases, with the case rather, these cases can go up to probably nearly $1 million. So it's hard to say have those cases over a long time. And so the conclusion is that unfair redistricting practices is here to stay. Political gerrymandering is used as a cover for racial gerrymandering and minority vote dilution. At least that's the argument that we work with. The courts are more hostile to fair redistricting plans, to fair redistricting efforts. Perhaps at any time I've been looking at this since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. We need a democracy movement, small d, a nonpartisan democracy movement that really looks at redistricting and its impact on representation, its impact on participation. And redistricting in 2030 starts now. So you may think, although this is 2024, this is 2030 is way off. No, it starts now with people becoming informed, putting pressure on the lawmakers, paying attention not just to state and congressional redistricting, but also local redistricting efforts as well. And I'll finally close off with, this is the projected 2030 congressional reapportionment plan. And guess what, folks? Tennessee, we have 9 members of Congress, Tennessee is projected to have 10. That means we're probably gonna get an additional member of Congress, and that addition is gonna occur because of the growth here in Middle Tennessee, Sumner County, the Williamson County, and Belton County. So again, I wanna thank you for listening to this. Hopefully, there wasn't too much mumbo jumbo, and hopefully you made some sense out of this process. Thank you.